you really can't keep a good hoax down. H.L. Mencken, he wrote how the bathtub was invented and how the first bathtub was installed in the White House by Millard Fillmore. 3 or 4 times, maybe even more than that, he wrote additional pieces saying it was all a hoax and nothing was true. You can still read in guidebooks that Millard Fillmore installed the first bathtub in the White House. And the thing keeps resurfacing. Another hoax you can't keep down is Mencken wrote a story again in 1917 as to how the spirit of St. George and the bowmen who were under Henry V at Agincourt appeared at the Battle of Mons and has helped the British soldiers to escape from the Germans in France. It's called the Angel of Mons. And this is widely believed, although Machen never intended it to be anything more than just a story that he dreamt up one afternoon.
There's been a tremendous amount of hoaxing within science for reasons that are not very noble. And scientists are always sort of poo-pooing many claims that, like in parapsychology or cryptozoology or whatever, that, oh, that's probably just a hoax, and they use that to dismiss it. But when a claim is made within some scientific area, very few people say, oh, that's probably just a hoax. They tend to trust each other as scientists, and as a result of that, scientists can often get away with hoaxing. There's the Piltdown case you mentioned, which is one of the classics, perhaps the classic of the century, and we still don't know who did it. Perhaps less well known is Sir Cyril Burt in Britain. So Cyril Burt was a psychologist who did a lot of studies, or supposedly did a lot of studies earlier in the century, and he used subjects. He had 2 researchers working with him, and he used a lot of subjects. He did a lot of work with children and with twins, and published a tremendous amount of data. And that data was so compelling that, in fact, the establishment and the British government implemented educational programs and tests. Well, we had to take that horrible 11 plus at 11, and it's all because of Sir Cyril Burt. Well, a few years ago, it turns out that the 2 colleagues who worked with Sir Cyril Burt on this never existed. They were completely fabricated people. And it turned out most of the data, a lot of it was fudged, fabricated, and Sir Cyril got knighted. He was one of the top psychologists in Britain. And there's a case in point. And there's certainly, if not hoaxing, there has certainly been and is a lot of what's called fudging. That basically the main body of your case is okay, it's solid, but you fudge some data just to make it more complete, to make it look more accurate. And they've even found that Galileo fudged some of his data. Basically, he was right, but there was a little fudging there. And it's not just in anomalies or in Forteana.
I think ufology probably had more hoaxes than any other Fortean field.
Extremely complicated and long-term hoaxes can be perpetrated. And it should be remembered for all other fields.
There's one going on right now with the MJ-12 papers, which is an absurd document. The MJ-12 paper has gripped the UFO community, and they've chosen sides on it. If anybody would sit down and read it word for word, they'd see it's an absurd hoax, a badly done hoax. And if they would bother to get any kind of briefing paper from the White House, and the White House will supply these, because they get 50 to 100 a week, you will see that the format and all the way it's laid out is completely wrong. Whoever did it was not only an amateur, but he was a rank amateur. He didn't know anything about the government, he didn't know anything about the military, and yet the UFO buffs have taken this MJ-12 thing to their hearts, and they're battling over it right now. And this will end up in all of the UFO books for the next 20 years. It's a real thing. One of Gray Barker's hoaxes, the best one probably, is the Edwards Air Force Base hoax, which you've all read about in UFO books. Gray Barker put out a memo, well, it was in the form of a letter, claiming that UFO had landed at Edwards Air Force Base, and the group of distinguished people, including President Eisenhower, had visited the base to talk to these UFO people. And to give himself away, Gray included in the list of famous people who went there, names of all of his friends. He listed his friends. Nobody ever checked this memo out, and it's now been published around the world as one of the great UFO incidents of the 1950s. And Gray Barker, wherever he is still laughing.
There's another important issue that I want to raise. We've seen a lot of investigators in the UFO field, particularly, and other fields as well, however, who start off as excellent investigators, excellent ufologists, excellent whatever they're investigating, do high-quality work, and then years later, they start falling for these absurd hoaxes and they go off the deep end. And it's a very curious phenomenon. We're seeing more and more of it in recent years. And as I thought about this, I thought, is it a desensitization process whereby people in the field are exposed to so much strangeness, legitimate strangeness in the phenomena, that they become desensitized to it, that nothing surprises them anymore. And consequently, the outrageous elements in a hoax, they take in stride like every other strange thing that they've seen.
Professional writers usually, at some point, they study a thing that's called suspension of disbelief. When you go to a James Bond movie, you know it's garbage. You know that these things could never happen to anybody, but you accept them while you're watching the movie. And it's the same process, except sort of extended into your private life. When you're a scientist or an investigator of strange things, after a while, you've heard so many strange things that you know you believe everything.
This is a problem that has long faced people in psychical research. About 50 years ago, a man named Walter Franklin Prince wrote a really fascinating book titled The Enchanted Boundary. And his thesis was that when people come into these Fortean or paranormal areas, they sometimes lose their normal critical senses, and they pass over what is called the enchanted boundary. And this can happen very, very abruptly. There's a very skeptical investigator named Eric Dingwall, who later became a member of PSYCOP. And one of the most celebrated mediumistic cases in psychical research is that of Marjorie, who's a well-known fraud. Dingwall came over from England, and in the first few days he was just totally flabbergasted, and he admitted that his whole world changed within just a day or two of his encounter. And he said if he hadn't later found a little more skeptical information, he would have become very, very credulous. There's a whole range of investigators who, once they have committed, they no longer are nearly so concerned with their controls and ruling out sensory cues and statistical artifacts. It's something people have to continually guard against. And the only way to do that is to have a sympathetic yet critical community who can engage in peer review, sometimes behind-the-scenes confrontation, sometimes you have to go public.
I think we left out the most important category of all, which is practical jokes. And there was a wonderful book published in the late 1940s by H. Allen Smith called The Complete Practical Joker. It is a hilarious book, and he covers especially the career of Hugh Troy, a man who did marvelous practical jokes. When there was an exhibit of Van Gogh's paintings, Hugh Troy took an old piece of old hamburger, and he fashioned an ear out of it. And he put this in a cushioned box, and then he made up a little sign, very fancy sign, painted, Van Gogh's ear. And he slipped this into the museum that had the Van Gogh exhibit and put it on a table. And crowds were gathering around looking at Van Gogh's ear.